Morning, everybody. Lisa Schaff at the OMA. Thanks for joining us today. Thanks. We're going to talk about managing an OSHA visit. So I don't know whether it's I don't know. I'm not even better not even comment. So before I bring up our subject matter expert today, who is Nate Burguy with SafeX, let me just do a quick housekeeping, if you'll permit me to do that. We are using GoToWebinar. If you have any trouble at all, technical trouble, please call the help desk at 800-263-6317. We did send you a copy of today's presentation so you can follow along. And while we're on this webinar, you can see in your dashboard a handout area. You could download it from there while we're on the webinar. And you know your audio lines are muted, and so as you think of your questions, go ahead and type them into the dashboard there, and we'll stay on the line as long as it takes to clean up our questions at the end. And I remind you, we just love the questions because a lot of knowledge is transferred, especially during that time. And what else? This afternoon, so we're recording this. So if there's somebody on your team who should listen to this after the fact, rest assured we are recording it. We'll put it up in the video library. So on ohiomfg.com, no worries about that. One thing I did want to mention is that Nate, we have recently published an OSHA response FAQ. And this idea came about because a lot of times in the process of working through workers' comp claims and issues, some OSHA issues arise. And so Diane Grody-Adams, who Nate works with, asked Nate to prepare an FAQ, OSHA response FAQ, for OMA members, especially for OMA members. So we have put that out there on your Workers' Comp Services dashboard for those who are clients or members of OMA. I'm also going to drop it in the email that we'll send you this afternoon. Two things in that email. One will be the OSHA FAQ, and the other thing will be a survey to ask how we did today and what other topics you want to hear about. So virtual round of applause for Nate because he did a super job in documenting that FAQ, and we're real proud of it. So I think I'm done there with housekeeping. So let me bring up Nate. So he does work for SafeX, and with SafeX going on 4 years, so not new to SafeX or new to manufacturers whatsoever. He's a certified industrial hygienist and also a certified safety professional. Does a lot of training and assessment and evaluation at SafeX. The reason that we're lucky to have him here today is that he was actually a compliance, safety, and health officer for OSHA and for the Office of Worker Safety and Health at the U.S. Department of Labor. So he comes right out of this, out of the field, so quite qualified to tell us about how to manage an OSHA visit. So lucky to have him. And with that, I'm going to give it over to Nate.
All right. Well, thank you for the intro. So let me make sure I can do this. All right, there we go. All right, so there's the title page. So what I'm going to go over today is basically what to expect if OSHA came knocking on your door, and kind of some tips and what to keep in mind during that inspection, and then after the inspection happens, and if, you know, God forbid you get some citations, how to manage those and deal with those. So what my main objectives are today is to discuss how OSHA can end up at your site. So there's different ways that they will initiate an inspection. We'll review the employer rights and responsibilities. So you do have certain rights that you know, OSHA has to honor when they are on site and you know, throughout the inspection process. I'm going to go over the basic steps of what an OSHA inspection looks like, and then discuss the response to citations if you know, you were lucky enough to have them come in and issue some citations. So as Lisa was saying, I was a compliance officer with OSHA from 2010 to 2013. So a lot of this, I worked with, on a daily basis. That being said, with, change of administration, and it's been, a few years since I've been in, policies changed. So some of my examples might be out of date, but for the most part, the information in this webinar comes straight out of the OSHA Field Operations Manual. So that hasn't changed, and a lot of the policies and procedures that OSHA follows would still be. Some of the internal policies on how they address things or how they cite things might alter a little bit, but for the most part, everything in this webinar is up to date, and most of my examples or stories will still probably be mostly relevant. So what is OSHA? So OSHA was created in 1970 under the Department of Labor. Their main objective is to ensure that every working man and woman has a safe and healthful work conditions at their workplace. Everyone knows them for the enforcement side. OSHA inspections and citations, that's the first thing that comes to mind. But they also do some training and some outreach, and they do have the assistant programs. So Ohio's lucky enough to have the BWC to have a really strong consulting branch, but there's also another part of that where OSHA provides funding to the state to have OSHA on-site consultation. So here in Ohio, I believe both services work out of the same office. Their money just comes from different spots. So they do offer the assistance and some outreach. But today we're just going to focus on the enforcement part because that's usually what causes the most headaches for people. They do cover private employers and federal workers. So there are some exemptions of what OSHA covers. Their jurisdiction is stopped right there at private employers and federal workers. So local governments here in Ohio, state government and local authorities, they're under PERP. They're not under OSHA, so OSHA has no jurisdiction to enforce any of their regulations. There's also some other exempts like self-employed. So if you're a sole proprietor, you would be exempt unless you have your business incorporated. OSHA views that as you are a sole employee of your business. Family farms under 10 employees are exempt. And then anything that's covered by another agency, like a mine, would be covered under MSHA. Some of the nuclear power plants are covered under a different agency. FAA is covered under FAA. Railroads, they have their own regulations from a different agency. But OSHA pretty much covers most of the working population. So what is OSHA's office made out of? So each office or area office has a number of people in it. And here in Ohio, I believe we have 4 area offices. We have Cleveland, Columbus, Cincinnati, Toledo. And each one of those offices has a jurisdiction that they cover based on counties. So each area office will have a compliance officers. These are your safety professionals or your industrial hygienists. They're the ones that actually conduct the inspections. They're out there on the field. Contrary to popular belief, they do not cite or issue citations. They just recommend citations. So they'll gather information, prepare a report, and then send it up the chain to their area director. The area director, they're basically the area office manager. They're in charge of the entire office. They're the one that reviews all cases and issues citations. So they're the ones that put their name on the dotted line. They also give the okay to initiate on-site inspections. So, if OSHA comes knocking, they're not just curious on what's going on in there. They have a reason why they're coming, and I'll kind of explain why they would come. But it's not just that, hey, we've never been in there before, let's go see what's doing. But the area director has to give the okay to initiate any on-site inspection, and that's more important on the construction side when a compliance officer's driving down the street and they see some serious violations on a construction site. usually in manufacturing, OSHA is not going to drive by and see issues and come in. So usually manufacturing inspections are initiated by complaints, accidents and injuries, or program inspections. And then there's also the assistant area director. They're kind of the middleman between the compliance officer and the area director. Compliance officers directly report to the assistant area director. They do most of the reviews for citations before giving them to the area director. But every now and then, if the area director is out of the office, they will act as the area director and cover those duties. So there's always someone in charge in the office. Those are just some kind of definitions of who's who in OSHA. In case you have an OSHA inspection and end up talking to one of these people, you know kind of what their duties are. At the end, I'll talk about when you receive citations, kind of your response. Once the citations are issued, you won't be dealing with the compliance officer anymore. You'll be dealing with the area director or the assistant area director. So we have a poll. How many OSHA inspections have you personally experienced, whether you were in the management position or you know, before management, if OSHA came and talked to you as an employee? Kind of want to see how much experience we have out there with OSHA. Okay, so those numbers don't surprise me. About half of those that have answered have never experienced an OSHA inspection. About a quarter have only had one, and the others less than 5. And then it looks like a very small number had more than 5. So that does not surprise me because right now in the United States, for the states that have federally operated OSHA, so about half the states, the state runs OSHA. So there's a state plan state. They tell OSHA, hey, we think we can run it better than the feds. So the feds give them 90% of their budget. And then as long as they meet or exceed OSHA's regulations, they can kind of do their own thing. So prime example is Cal OSHA. They have their own standards. They're a lot more strict than federal. But of the federal states that run OSHA federally, and Ohio being one of them, there's only 1,800 OSHA compliance officers covering, 60 million workplaces and over 150 million workers. So the compliance officer to company ratio is very low. So OSHA's out there, but they do not, they don't show up at most places very often, unless something occurs. So OSHA inspections can be very rare, but they're out there, especially if you have the bigger the corporation or facility you have, the more likely they would be to come out. So that's good to know. Employer rights and responsibilities. I'll go through this real quick, but the next 2 slides is employer rights and then employee rights. So as the employer, there's a general duty clause in the OSHA Act. If anyone's heard of the general duty clause or 5A1 citation, this is the general clause that all workers have the right to a workplace that's free from recognized hazards. OSHA puts the responsibility on the employer rather than the employee. So that's the general duty clause. Sometimes if there's a recognized hazard that could cause some serious harm or death, OSHA will cite the general duty clause if there's no standard that covers it. So some of you may have recognized that. Basically, the employer has the ultimate responsibility for safety and health. The employer has the right to enforce and discipline workers for violating their reasonable safety and health rules. The clear and reasonable is where they put an emphasis. If you have general or vague safety rules and you discriminate employees against some of these rules, you might get into what they call the Whistleblower Protection Act, where the employee can have a whistleblower investigator come out and make sure that they weren't wrongfully terminated or wrongfully disciplined. The employer also has the right to deny entry for OSHA. So if OSHA shows up, you have the right to say, you know what, we're not going to let you in. I'd never recommend that, though, unless you have a very good reason, because 10 times out of 10, OSHA will go to the federal marshals and say, hey, we need a warrant because we were denied entry. And then they will likely come back that day or the next day and bring some friends. So you do have the right to deny entry, but then OSHA has the right to go get a subpoena and a warrant to enter. You have the right to contest citations. So if you receive citations, you have the right to disagree formally, and I'll talk more about that later. And you have the right to participate in the inspections and take any photos and notes that OSHA takes, and I'll talk more about that as well. All right. Employee rights. So your employees also have rights. They have the right to be discriminated, free from being discriminated against, seeking a safe job, complaining to a union or to OSHA, and they have the right to participate in an OSHA inspection. They're covered under the 11C Whistleblower Protection Act. So if someone was wrongfully terminated for seeking a safe job, then there are investigators out there that will investigate those claims. But they are also responsible for following employees' safety and health policies. So the purpose of OSHA inspections basically, are you in compliance with OSHA's regulations? Like I said before, they will enforce the 5A1 general duty clause if there is hazards that are not covered by an OSHA standard. If anyone is familiar with OSHA standards, they're very, very vague, and they're very vague for a reason, and that's because those standards are meant to cover all types of manufacturing, all types of workplaces. So if they made them very detailed, they kind of pigeonhole how they can enforce those if it doesn't align with all manufacturing processes. So they are very vague, and then they have that general duty clause as a catch-all as well. They're conducted by compliance officers. Their compliance officers spend a lot of training up in Chicago at the OSHA Training Institute. So they're very well versed in OSHA standards and inspection, how to talk to employees. There's a whole 2-week class on the legal aspects of OSHA, so they're pretty well trained. Although OSHA does hire a lot of younger, inexperienced safety professionals, so I have heard many stories of some of the compliance officers not knowing some of their regulations, but most of the time they're usually pretty reasonable and pretty knowledgeable. So what initiates a visit from OSHA? There are 5 inspection types, and there's an order of inspection. So if OSHA had 5 different inspections to do, this is the order that they would complete those in. So imminent danger, so they would do that first. The second list on the priority is the fatality or this severe injury. They always look at imminent danger over fatality, which might sound counterintuitive, but if you think about it, if after a fatality or a severe injury, the employer is probably aware that something happened, and they're more likely to fix a situation, where an imminent danger is someone's in danger of becoming injured or possibly being killed, so they want to get out there ASAP to prevent further injury. Third on the list is complaints and referrals, and complaints can be employee complaints, or it could be a referral from, say, another agency, another OSHA office, or even another compliance officer. So when I was in OSHA, I was an industrial hygienist. I focused on the health side of occupational safety and health, so I did a lot of the air monitoring and the industrial hygiene work. If I came across a very complex safety hazard, that I didn't feel comfortable with, I would refer another compliance officer that was, more experienced in that area to address it. So referrals can come from all over. Program inspections are always on the bottom of the list. These are your random program generated type inspections. And then last is always follow-up. So I kind of talked about these, so I'll go through these real quick. Imminent danger, the definition is there's a situation where death or serious irreversible harm is reasonably expected. The threat must be imminent. So the threat or the hazard or the fall could happen before OSHA has time to come in and do a full investigation. OSHA rarely gives advance notice when they initiate an inspection. Usually they show up unannounced. In the event of an imminent danger, OSHA might call the employer and say, hey, we had this report, you need to address this and we're going to be there soon. It's very rare, but this is one instance where they might give advance notice that they're about to initiate an inspection. Some examples of imminent dangers that OSHA might respond to would be, working inside unguarded trenches, working from heights without fall protection, and then working in a confined space without any, monitoring or rescue or any precautions like that. So stuff that can, kill or seriously hurt someone in a very short amount of time. Fatality or severe injury, just like it sounds, a fatality. If someone is killed on the job, you have to report that to OSHA within 8 hours, and usually OSHA is going to arrive as soon as they can. When I was a compliance officer, I remember being out at lunch. My boss called me on my lunch break and said, hey, you need to end lunch and hurry up because we had a fatality that you need to get out to. I've also had calls at Sunday morning at 8 a.m. So they usually don't wait until, the next week or the following day. They'll try to get out there as soon as they can. Severe injury is another one where they will come out to do inspection in most cases. The severe injury reporting is if you have an amputation, inpatient hospitalization, or loss of an eye. These you have to report to OSHA within 24 hours of being notified. Some of the more minor amputations, OSHA is not showing up, but they will call and follow up and have you do your own investigation on what happened. If it was a major amputation or someone was sent to the hospital and they were administered in inpatient, OSHA probably would come out within a day or two to investigate. Complaints and referrals. This is probably the biggest source of inspections in manufacturing. We have formal complaints which are submitted by employees. When I was in OSHA, we had to have a signed letter faxed or sent to us. So that deterred a lot of employees that were either disgruntled or just wanted to get back at them. It made them go get a stamp and write a letter and sign it and send it in or find a fax machine. That usually was a good deterrent. But now OSHA allows you to formalize complaints online. So there's not that verification process. So there's probably a lot more formal complaints coming in than from what I remembered. So any formal complaint where an employee states their name, states all that kind of information and says, I want an inspection. If OSHA receives that, they have to perform the inspection, no matter how outrageous the complaint items sound. I did have an inspection where someone signed a complaint with 52 complaint items. It took 2 compliance officers 2 days to address all 52 complaint items, and 0 of them were valid. So that can be very frustrating for all parties involved. A non-formal complaint, these are your phone and fax. If a lot of people have received these, where OSHA basically calls and says, we had a notice of complaint, we're going to send you the complaint, and then we need you to address it and get back to us within 5 days and tell us how you fixed any issues you found. Sometimes when those come in, and that's where if an employee wants to remain anonymous or they don't want an inspection, if the area director looks at that complaint and says, you know what, this is too serious to address over the phone, we need to do an inspection. The area director can upgrade that non-formal complaint to an inspection. That happens if there's any of the emphasis programs involved, or if there's a health hazard or a imminent danger hazard. Usually area directors will upgrade those to a inspection. Then there's also referrals. Again, I kind of said this before, they can come from other compliance officers, other agencies. We had referrals from the health agency all the time, and when I worked in Pennsylvania, you know, if workers would come in and have high blood leads, the Department of Health would refer those to us and say, hey, there's some lead issues. So we would go out on those, or we've had referrals from FDA, we've had referrals from first responders responding to accidents and injuries, saying, hey, we're taking care of some people that got hurt at work, you might want to come out here. There is something called a media referral. So OSHA will follow the news. If they see some workplace issues on the news, or, you know, there's accidents that are being covered on the news, OSHA will see that and come out. And then there's that self-referral. That's more for what I was talking about with the construction compliance officers. They see something from the road, you know, worker working on top of a building without fall protection, they'll call in and do what's called a self-referral. So another poll. Do you guys think that your company could be cited for a contractor on site having issues? So you have a contractor on site, OSHA comes in, finds issues. Do you believe that your company could be cited for issues they have? All right, 80% of you were right. So yes, you can be on the hook for stuff your contractors are doing. So say you hire someone to come in and install some new light switches and they're not locking things out. That's more unlikely that OSHA would come in and cite you for the contractor. This is more of if you have a contractor working on site and they work with you for an extended period of time or a daily basis, where you're walking through their area and should have or have seen issues and didn't correct them. It being your site, you ultimately have the control over safety. So you could be cited as what they call a controlling employer. So you are not employing the employees, but you're controlling those employees' workspace. It's much, much more common in construction. But some of the larger facilities that have contract crews or contract workers, it does happen. On the flip side, if you have contractors working in your facility and you have an OSHA inspection, there's nothing that says OSHA can't open inspection with them if they see something in plain view. And I'll kind of talk about that plain view violation as well. So for contractors, if OSHA does show up and you have contractors on site, it'd be very important to determine with OSHA if they're here to see your company or contractors on the site. If OSHA does show up as a general courtesy, you know, let the other contractors know OSHA's on the site, even if they're not being inspected. Because OSHA can and will open inspections with anything they see, no matter who employs them. One example is I went to this site in Pennsylvania. It was just a program inspection for metals. And when I pulled in the driveway, I saw a bunch of scaffolding around their building, and people are up on the above 10 feet without any guardrails on their scaffolding. So I was like, well, I can't just walk by that. So I opened up an inspection and I started addressing the scaffolding issues. And then the plant manager of the facility comes out and says, you know, what's going on? I said, well, I was here to inspect you guys, but then I saw this. So let me finish this inspection and then I'm going to open an inspection with you. So it was kind of a long day on that one. But, you know, OSHA will not ignore violations that they see from other people. So it's good to let the contractors know that OSHA is on site so they can, you know, take any action they want. So it is true that you can be cited for contractor violations. However, if you have no way of knowing that they've had a violated condition, then it's usually unlikely. So if it's minor violations that you wouldn't really be expected to know about, I wouldn't worry about it. But if you see your contractors working without fall protection on a daily basis, that's another thing. So program inspections, these are based on emphasis programs, whether it's a national emphasis program or a local emphasis program. It's based on the NAICS code or the industry code. So OSHA will pull all of the industries with certain industry codes in their jurisdiction, and they'll have a list, and they'll just use a random order generator to generate a list in order, and then they'll start at the top of the list and hit all of the companies in order. So most of the time the NEPs and LEP programs, there's a set number of inspections that each office has to do, and usually they're going to try to hit that number and not exceed it too much. So one example is there's a national emphasis program for PSM, the process safety management. Those inspections take so long. Each office is supposed to do about 5 a year. So most of the time the office will hit their 5 and then try not to open any more inspections. With the new reporting of severe injuries, OSHA is so bogged down with complaints and injury response that there's a lot less program inspections than there used to be. And again, these are those random inspections that OSHA does, comes knock on your door just to see, if you have, I think silica is going to be one. They rescinded it, and I think they're revising it with the new standard. There's like lead, powered industrial trucks. I know Ohio has some with grain handling facilities. So there's different programs out there, and if you fall under that NAICS code, you could have a random inspection on those. Sometimes if there's a complaint at a facility, the area director will look if there's a program inspection planned. And a lot of times if there's a program inspection that's going to happen soon and they receive a complaint, they'll kind of combine the two. That way OSHA doesn't come address the complaint and then a week later come back and do another program inspection. They'll just kind of group it together to save some time. So that is how OSHA would show up. Like I said, most of the time it's complaints or response to an injury. Program inspections are a lot rarer. I'm going to guess once they have a emphasis program for silica, we'll see a lot more silica enforcement. But last I checked in Ohio, there has only been 2 OSHA citations for silica issues, and both were in construction. But that's because they don't have an emphasis program or a directive that tells them how to do those inspections, but it's coming. So OSHA does show up. The things you need to know is that there's 3 parts to an OSHA inspection. When they come, they'll enter and then they'll hold an opening conference. It's kind of just like a sit down, talk about why they're there, and go from there. The walk around inspection, that's the bulk of it, where they're taking a look at the facility and collecting data. And then the closing conference where they just kind of wrap everything up. So before we get to the opening conference, OSHA will gain entry to your facility. This is very important to address because if you set a tone early on how the inspection is going to go, it can kind of set the mood for the inspection. And I'll kind of get into why that can be very important. So when OSHA does come, they'll come during regular working hours. OSHA's working hours are generally 8:30 to 5 p.m. In my experience, compliance officers typically don't like opening inspections on Mondays and Fridays, so a lot of times it's Tuesday through Thursday that they're going to be out there. They'll come through the main entrance, they'll show their credentials, they'll request to see the highest ranking official on site, and they do that just so the whoever's in charge understands that OSHA's there, and that gives them a chance to deny entry if they want to do that. Again, I never recommend denying entry. And also give the official a chance to show OSHA that they're going to take it seriously and all that kind of stuff. Compliance officer will generally wait up to an hour to initiate a opening conference. This can be like, say you have a safety person that's off site, or you need to get someone that's off site involved, or you need to round everyone up. They'll give you time to do that, usually up to an hour. Anything beyond an hour, they may look at that as denying entry. I would not make OSHA wait an hour if you don't have a good reason. I would kind of communicate while they're waiting. have them stay in the lobby or put them in a conference room. But again, they will generally, policy is wait up to an hour for you to get all your people in order. If it's a complaint, they may not be as likely to give you an hour, but if it's a program inspection, you can fix all the little stuff you want. They're not worried about that. So my tips on entry, and again, these are tips from my experience, both while I was an OSHA compliance officer, now as a consultant, helping companies that have OSHA inspections. The first impressions will set the entire tone. So if OSHA comes into your facility and they're treated, either in an unsatisfactory way, or OSHA gets the feeling that there's not a lot of organization at the facility, their ears might perk up and they might be a little more on guard to when they inspect. On the flip side, if you come in and you are very organized, you have them wait, you have the right people show up, and it's very orderly, it can impress OSHA, and they might say, you know what, I believe this company might be doing the right thing, so I'm gonna kind of relax a little bit and give them the benefit of the doubt. They are people, so they do, they do see that kind of thing. If you're putting up a wall after every question they ask, they will be on guard a little bit. One tip is determine who would most likely meet OSHA when they came in. So if they're coming in, it might be a good idea to meet with your, receptionist or whoever's closest to the entry door and kind of let them know who OSHA is, what they do, and if they show up, who should they be calling and how should they greet OSHA. I've had companies where I showed up and the receptionist said, oh, the plant manager's in a meeting, could you come back tomorrow? And I said, well, not really. You're probably going to want to give him a call and let him know I'm here. So, letting the person know that's going to greet OSHA, what OSHA is, and that it's a serious matter to address can be very helpful. Another thing would be having them know the hierarchy of contacts, so who to contact if OSHA does show up. So say the plant manager's out, who would be next in line? Say it's summertime, everyone's on vacation, safety person's out, who would be the next person? I've had that happen where I showed up and everyone's on vacation, and I said, well, we still need to do an inspection, and we had a shift supervisor that had no idea what was going on, kind of walk us through a little bit, and then at that point, we gave them the benefit of the doubt. We said, we just want to walk through, see this situation, and we'll hold all questions until your management gets back, but we need to at least initiate the inspection. If you do have a visitor safety and health video or an orientation or anything that you require other visitors to do, they will sit through all that. The only thing they won't sign is like a release or an NDA or anything like that. If you appear to be unorganized and unprepared, like I was saying, OSHA may remain guarded or look a little closer if it looks like you're not really organized or doing the right thing. They may dig a little deeper. So once they make entry and you get all your people around, OSHA will hold an opening conference. This is where they state their scope of the inspection and why they're there. They'll cover the basic employee rights and responsibilities like I did earlier. They'll likely request some programs. Unless it's a complaint, they'll usually do that at the end. If it's a complaint, just because they want to get out on the floor and see what's doing as soon as they can. But on program inspections, an opening conference could take 2 or 3 hours where they're reviewing documents. They're always going to look at your injury logs, typically the last 3 years. They'll always want to see your HAZCOM program, so your hazard communication program. They'll probably want to look at PPE program, and then any program related to why they're there. So if they're there for a forklift complaint, they're probably going to want to look at forklift training, forklift program, forklift, certifications, all those kind of things. Or if it's lockout tagout, they'll probably want to look at lockout tagout programs and procedures. So having all those documents easily accessible looks good. If OSHA shows up and it takes you 2 hours to produce your OSHA 300 logs, it's not really setting a good impression. And again, if it's a complaint, usually OSHA will wait until the very end of the opening conference, give you the complaint items to review as you're walking out. If they gave you the complaint items in the beginning, usually what happens is the plant manager is going to look at the complaint items, just tune out everything OSHA's saying and try to figure out what's going on. So usually they'll keep that till the very end. So my tips during an opening conference, make sure all your programs are readily available. That way you can produce what you need to when you need to. I would never recommend just taking your safety and health program binder and handing it to them. If they want your HAZCOM program, pull the HAZCOM program out and give them just HAZCOM. So whatever they request, only give them what they're requesting. I would also ensure several people know where these programs are. If it's just you or just the safety person that knows, if they're out of the office and OSHA shows up, someone's got to know how to find them. Keep your OSHA logs up to date. They're supposed to be up to date within the last 7 days. And it might not be a bad idea to have a pre-planned inspection roster, so a list of people who should be involved in any OSHA inspection. Next would be your walk around. So this is where OSHA is collecting facts for the violation. They're going to look at what employees are exposed. They're going to detail the descriptions of hazards. They're going to look at employees' proximity to the hazard, employees' knowledge, how long the hazard existed. You know, these are all those things OSHA needs to build a case for a citation. So when they're collecting their supporting evidence, they're always going to take photos. They might take videos. They're always going to talk to employees. They may not always get like a signed statement, but they're always going to talk to at least a few employees because, you know, a safety manager can tout their safety program all day and all the training they've done, but if the employees don't know what they're talking about or forget everything, it doesn't really do a lick of good if the employees didn't absorb it. So they're always going to talk to the employees. They might request some documentation. If it's a health hazard, they'll do some air sampling, and they may look at your consensus standards if there's any sort of heavy engineering involved, like a process safety management site. The interviews, there's always non-manager interviews. So these are your hourly type workers. These are always private and confidential. The employees have the right to refuse representation, but they also have the right to have representation. So a lot of times some unions might say, you know, we have the right to be there in that interview, which is false. The employees have the right to have them in, but the employee doesn't have to have that representation if they don't want it. They may collect a signed statement. The signed statement just holds a little more weight, but it's still, it's not the end all be all. And these can be conducted anytime. So on bigger scale inspections or fatalities, a lot of times the compliance officer will ask to meet with the employees outside of work to make them feel a little more comfortable. I remember doing some interviews at a Waffle House nearby just to make the employee feel like they weren't being watched or monitored. So those are your non-manager interviews. Your manager interviews are not considered confidential. So anything a manager says to OSHA can quote and use their name, and they may be referenced in the case file. So it's good to let the managers know that their interviews are not confidential. So my tips during the walk-around inspection, bring your camera. Anything OSHA takes a picture of, take a picture of. If they're taking a picture of something, I would say, what are you taking a picture of? I'm going to take the exact same picture. Reason I do that is if you end up contesting an inspection, it might take 2 years before it's seen in front of a judge, and it's really hard to remember details 2 years later. I once had to go on the stand for OSHA inspection that took place in 2010, and this was in 2012. So it was about 2.5 years after I was on site. And having pictures and written notes really helped jog my memory. Otherwise, I would have had no idea. So for your benefit, take pictures. Everything they take a picture of, take a picture of. Don't be afraid to ask questions. OSHA is pretty transparent. So if you say, you know, are you going to recommend a citation for this, or is there something wrong here? Is there something I can do? Don't be afraid to ask. If they do spot a violation or a hazard, you know, if you can fix it on the spot, OSHA will note that, and if they do end up citing it, but you fix it, they'll note that, and then you won't have to verify that you've corrected it later. A big one is control the route of the inspection. So it's not uncommon for OSHA to show up and say, I need to look at this area. And, you know, it's not uncommon to have a company say, you know what, it's a real nice day out. Let's walk around back. We'll go in the back door. It takes us right there. That's, you know, OSHA, they might laugh, but they'll do it. And there's nothing they'll really put up a stink. If you know there's an area that has some issues, you know, if you go around that area so they don't see it, that's completely acceptable. Because again, if OSHA does see violations or hazards while they're on site, and even if it's not part of their scope, if they see it, they'll address it. So if you limit what they can see without, you know, interfering with their inspection, that could benefit you. Limit the attendance, so only have people walk through with OSHA that will contribute to the inspection. Having a big panel of people follow them around can just, you know, it can make things confusing and kind of a mess. So, and then my big thing in all caps, do not provide information that was not asked. So my advice is to be a stone wall that walks with OSHA, and when they ask you a question, you answer the question. And if you're not sure what they're asking, ask them for clarification. Some people, when they get nervous, they just start talking and talking and talking to break that silence. And if you do that to OSHA, they're just going to keep listening and listening and listening and write down everything you say. So if they ask a question, answer the question, and then let the awkward silence continue. But at the same time, allow the compliance officer to do their work. If they get the feeling that you're trying to interfere with what they're doing, that could get a little dicey as well. So, you know, providing only what they asked and taking pictures, that's completely fine. But if you're trying to put up a wall and block them from everything they're doing, you know, that could give them the situation where they're going to dig a little deeper. And then after the walk around, they'll do a closing conference where they just kind of explain what violations they saw, what citations they might recommend, and then they'll kind of go over the citation process. And this usually, if it's a short inspection, it'll happen day of. Sometimes this might be a day after or after some research that on their end. So it's not always right away. So my tips for closing conference: always make sure you understand what they're citing. So if they are going to recommend some citations, make sure you understand exactly what that means and what you can do to fix it. If you disagree with any of the citations, I would politely, you know, let your disagreements known, but that's not the time to argue them. And I'll get more on that in a minute. And make sure that if you've corrected anything during that inspection, make sure OSHA has documented and seen that correction. Also, limit the closing conference attendance. So I've had some closing conference where I'm at the boardroom meeting with, you know, 30 people in there, and it's just, it doesn't really do anyone good other than to have the people that need to be there. So OSHA comes, they leave, you get some citations in the mail. What do you do? So when the citations arrive, they'll arrive via certified mail. So OSHA will know when you get them, or if you do not accept it, the mail, they'll know that as well. Unfortunately, I've had to hand deliver some citations that they weren't accepting the mail. So once you get those, you have 15 working days to do something once you receive those. So if you receive citations today, tomorrow the 15-day clock starts where you have your options to address the citation. So you can always just accept the citations as is. I almost never recommend this unless you get what's called a expedited settlement agreement. So OSHA says, you know, you're a good company, your violations were pretty minor, we're just going to give you X amount off the penalty. If you agree, just sign it and go. If you get one of those, you can accept as is. I think in this day and age, those are a lot more rare. It's usually good companies that just had a minor blip. What I always recommend, no matter what, is to schedule an informal conference. And I'll talk about that here in another slide. This is where you informally discuss, sorry, what is that? It's where you informally discuss what's going on, what you've done. and any disagreements you have. Lastly, you can always send a letter of contest. So you don't agree with the citations, you can contest them, and this is where you have you get your lawyers involved, OSHA gets their lawyers involved, and you have a field day with that. So the penalty types, there's other than serious, willful, repeat, and failure to abate. Other than serious would be anything that wouldn't cause harm or death. That's like your record-keeping violations. Your serious violation, that is anything that could cause harm or death, whether it's from paper cut to, amputation. Those are up to $13,000. These penalties change every year. I think starting 2012, they started increasing penalties because it got to the point where some corporations were just seeing the penalties as a cost of doing business. And I had one employer tell me that OSHA penalties are cheaper than hiring a consultant. So OSHA started increasing those every year to kind of match inflation. So they do kind of creep up a little bit every year. They went from 7,000 to now they're 13,000. Willful, you never want to willful. These are you knowingly ignore standards or you just have a plain indifference for safety and health. Those start out at 132,000 and kind of work their way down. Same with a repeat. So OSHA's been there, cited you. They come back and start citing the exact same standards or same hazards. You don't want that to happen as well. So there is a penalty reduction. I won't go through all this. There's a lot of detail there, but those are the max penalties. And then based on the size of your company, you might get reductions automatically. Based on the gravity of the citation or hazard, there'll be some reductions. So if it's a low probability and the severity of the injury is very low, you could have a 60% reduction in that as well. And then there's some other things that reduce it as well, like good faith and history. The reductions are applied serially, not summed. So they'll take the 70 and then they'll take 60 off that reduced, and then they'll take 25 off the already reduced. So it's not like if you had a 70 and a 60, you're gonna have zero, like a 0% penalty. So most of the time your penalties are going to range from 3,000 if you're a really small company up to the 13,000 if you're a large company. And that's per violation. So a lot of times I've seen a lot lately where your average inspection is about 30 grand based on 4 or 5 violations. So the informal conference, you get all of your citations, you go through that. I always recommend the informal conference. This is an informal meeting with the area director or the assistant area director. This is where you discuss your disagreement. You can come to if you come to an agreement with the AD, say, these citations are valid, but I don't believe the seriousness or the gravity of the citations are correct. You can kind of go with that, or you can say, hey, you cited this as serious. I don't see this as a serious citation. You can argue that. Sometimes, the area director will give you a reduction just for showing up and, giving good faith that you're going to address some safety issues. Sometimes they might say, you know what, we cited you on 4 counts of lockout tagout. We'll group all those in the one citation, reduce your penalty. So most people come out of the informal conference pretty satisfied with the result. I believe most of the offices here in Ohio, the area directors are pretty easy to work with, and most people have an informal settlement agreement. The informal settlement agreement will usually put something on you, though. There will be an agreement that you're going to hire a safety person or hire a consultant or submit updates or something like that to kind of keep you on the hook to fix these things. But at the same time, OSHA will usually either combine or reduce the number of citations and greatly reduce the penalty amount. You can dispute anything from number of citations to penalty amount to how it was cited. A lot of companies, they might not want something cited lockout tag out. They might rather it be cited under the electrical standard. That way they're not dealing with repeats if they have other lockout issues. So you can disagree with any aspect of the citation. The big thing is if you're looking to contest, I would still do the informal, but I would do it ASAP because it does not extend your contest period. So if you show up informal on day 15, you're not happy and you want to contest, you have to do that day. If there are issues, you can always call the area director and try to extend that, but usually they will not extend that 15-day timeline. Informal tips, again, these are informal, so come prepared. Come prepared with what your argument is going to be. Ask questions, make sure you know what is being expected of you. Never bring a lawyer. Again, this is informal. Bringing a lawyer shows that it's a formal discussion, and most area directors just won't have it. Limit your attendance to just a few people. This is where you make a case for your safety and health culture and programs. Anything you've done since the inspection, I would show, it shows good faith that you're willing to correct things and get better. Again, you do not have to correct any of the OSHA citations until they're final, and nothing is final until you've either signed or that 15 days is lapsed. So at this point, you're not expected or required to fix any issues they found because it's technically not formal. But if you do fix those things, it does show good effort and good faith effort to comply. So say the informal doesn't work out and you just want to get lawyers involved and make things go away, you would submit a formal letter of contest. And again, like the informal, you can contest any aspect of the citation. You can contest all the citations as is. You can contest the penalty amount, just a single citation, how it was worded, the standard it was cited, anything like that. Must be in writing, and you must do that within that 15 working days of getting the receiving the citations. And again, I always recommend the informal before the contest because a lot of times people are happy with the informal. So with the poll, do you have a current plan of action if an OSHA inspector were to walk on your facility? So if OSHA comes, do you have a clear understanding of what you're going to do, or are you just going to wing it? All right, looks like a good amount of people have a plan, and some are going to after this webinar. That's good to know. Yeah, it's always good to have it, even if it's just a list of people to get involved, or making sure people know where to find things. Any preparation is better than no preparation. Some of the best inspections I went on, they were very organized. It made my life easy, made their life easy. I got in and got out, and it wasn't too bad. If things are not organized and you're kind of fumbling around, it gives OSHA more time to kind of see things. As a compliance officer, my eyes like to wander around the facility and kind of just look at what's going on. So yeah, it's good to have a plan and be efficient. All right, so bottom line, most people say OSHA inspections are fairly painless, unless there's a fatality. Usually the compliance officer, it's their daily job, so usually they're pretty relaxed and fair, but not always. Preparation can be very important. Again, only provide what they're asking for, and if you don't know what they're asking for, ask for clarification. Always take your own pictures and notes, and again, informal conference, if you have citations, is always huge. So again, OSHA should be pretty transparent and shouldn't try to hide anything. So if you have questions on what's going on or why something's taking so long, or if they're gonna cite something, go ahead and ask, and they should have no problem doing that. So questions?
Wow, Nate, thank you so much. So I know it is 11 o'clock and we advertised this for a full hour. So you got your money's worth, full hour, and it was straight from the horse's mouth, as it were. So very insightful. I will invite anybody who has a hard stop at 11 to jump off at this point, and anyone who can stay on. We're going to keep Nate as long as we have questions here, because a number of questions have come in. So that's how we'll proceed. Again, and then you have Nate's contact information. I'm sure he'd love to hear follow-up from you if your question is not answered today. So a couple questions about this denying entry to the OSHA officer. So what would be considered a good reason that you might be able to actually deny entry?
I don't have a good answer for that. Sometimes it could be, in the one case where we were kind of denied was pretty much every single person of management was off site, and the only person on site was a shift supervisor, and they had no idea what was going on. So the company did not want us to use his testimony as what their safety program is, because he was not aware of it. So in that case, what we ended up doing, and I don't think all offices would do that. Our office was pretty good in, working with people, but we said, let us do a walk around, see the conditions. We won't talk to anyone. We just want to see how it looks today. And then they were happy with that. We walked through, took pictures, came back later, and then asked questions. Other than that, there's not a good reason, unless you think that you have some major issues that you could fix. But just know, when OSHA comes back, usually if they have a limited scope and they come back from a denial of entry with a warrant, they're usually going to upgrade that to a wall-to-wall, look at everything inspection, because OSHA sees that as a, you're trying to hide something. So I would almost never recommend it unless something comes up and you would rather take your chances of having that wall-to-wall inspection rather than having them go at that point. I've never heard of a time when a judge denied OSHA a warrant. So
couple questions about the issue of taking photo or video. So the question is, can you deny an OSHA inspector the opportunity to take photos or videos, and do you have the right to ask them for the copies of the pictures they took?
So that's a good question. Part of OSHA's inspection is taking pictures, so you can't deny them from taking a picture, but what they do is they will work with you if you have like trade secret or do not want pictures getting out. So what they do is they can control those. They put them in a separate folder and a separate case file. So if there was like a Freedom of Information Act request, those photos would not be included. You have to make sure you're very upfront that there is a trade secret. A lot of times when people would come to me with those kind of requests, I would say, is there a way I can take this picture where I get what I want and it keeps, your process out? And usually they're okay with, like, if I just want to look at a missing machine guard and it's not, I don't need the whole process, I just need that little area, I can kind of frame it so they're happy and I'm happy. But otherwise they can, they'll take the picture and then put it in a controlled document that won't get requested. The only way you can get their pictures is after the case is closed and you put in a Freedom of Information Act request. Otherwise, that's why I always say carry your own camera and take the exact same picture they take. If you ask, they usually will show you what picture they took, but again, they won't give them to you until after the inspection is closed. During an employee interview, can a member of management sit in or attend? No. I've had employees request that management sits in. OSHA will never tell you to have management sit in, but if an employee requests it, usually they're going to shy away from that or find someone else to interview, because they don't want, OSHA is very protective of employees and their right to being discriminated against. We've had a lot of issues where employees or employers are listening in and eavesdropping, and then end up terminating employees based on their responses to OSHA. So OSHA is very, very strict on limiting management involvement with employee interviews. A couple questions about this contractor business. John wants a clarification that contractors do include temporary employees or temp workers as well. Right. So the temp worker situation is very, it's not very cut and dry because it all depends on um, who's directing the work. So OSHA doesn't care who pays someone's paycheck. It's more based on who's directing the day-to-day work. So if you hire temp employees, a temp agency is paying them, but you're telling them their daily tasks, you're on the hook for whatever that temp is doing. Now, if you say we need temp employees to do X task, and then they have their own supervisor that directs the work, that would limit your involvement and probably limit the amount that OSHA could look at you for. So the biggest question is who's directing the day-to-day supervision, and that's usually who's going to be on the hook. Does that answer that question?
Come back around if that didn't answer the question for you. Rich wants to know if employees can deny to answer any questions that OSHA inspector asks them.
Yes. So a lot of times, some employees might not be comfortable with being interviewed, and OSHA will usually be fine with that, and they'll find someone else. But sometimes, if it was like a fatality or a very serious issue that OSHA is investigating, if they really need that person's testimony or something, they may subpoena them. But again, that's very, very rare. I've only seen it happen once in the several years that I was with OSHA. But usually, if on a normal inspection, if I'm just there for a complaint, if someone is really nervous and doesn't want to talk to me, I'll just find someone else. If everyone doesn't want to talk to me, that's when we get the office involved and try to figure something out. But they'll always want to at least talk to several people.
This might be a little off topic. I'll try it anyway. So once a tow motor operator has been trained, tested, and evaluated, is the issuance of a formal license required? Is a driver's license card required to be issued? And I guess the question is, will OSHA be looking for that?
I don't know that standard well enough to know if what they would look at. So if you want to email me, you have my email there. Email me your question. I can forward it to someone or do a little research. But off the top of my head, I'm not 100% sure on that one.
Okay, thanks for that question, Chris. And then please do follow up and get your answer. Let's see. So this contractor question is a contractor management problem.
Yeah, it's very confusing setup that OSHA has it, how they have it.
With what? With respect to tow motors?
No, the contractor relationship, the hierarchy of subcontractors and all that. That can be, it's very confusing and case by case based with OSHA. So yeah, I'm sure there's lots of questions on that.
Oh, I'm following you. Pardon me. Okay, so here's the situation. Can the company be cited for the contractor violation even if there's proof that the company asked the contractor to correct the violation, but the contractor did not do it?
That's a tough one. If it was in writing and it was recent, then most times OSHA is gonna say you did the right thing. If you've alerted them and it was months ago and you've still let them continue to operate in that unsafe manner, then it shows that you're not really following up on what you're saying. So it could happen.
Okay.
It's very rare that there's situations like that, but yeah, if you tell someone they're doing something wrong and you don't correct it, then it's it kind of shows that there's a lack of follow-up on that.
All right. I hope that answered the question. So for the participant who sent that in, stay on them. Is the answer there? Okay. Well done. We only stumped you a little bit on the tow motor.
Yeah.
We're going to give you 99% on all that.
Great.
All right, awesome. So we've cleaned up all the questions that are in file, and thank you for hanging on and listening to the answers. And thank you, Nate. A couple just dropped in here. Let me
Okay.
ask you. Let's see, Nate. Could you suggest a source for OSHA plans. So we have the guidelines you gave us today in the handout, and what other resources might you suggest?
So OSHA actually has a lot of information on their website. Their website is a little tough to navigate, but there is a lot of publications on how to do things more than just their regulations, which are kind of legal speak. They have a lot of publications and pamphlets and handouts, so that there's I think it's in the resource tab or a publications tab. Also, on their site, trying to think. Oh yeah, if you have concerns of how they do inspections, every one of their emphasis programs, which is basically the blueprint of an inspection of how a compliance officer should handle things, all of those are public. So if you want to know how they're going to inspect, lockout tagout inspections, or how they're going to inspect silica issues, they have all of that published. They're called local emphasis programs or national emphasis programs, or a directive that list what they're looking for. So those are good too on a very specific topic basis. If there's anything else, just email me. I'm happy to answer questions if you need more guidance on anything OSHA related.
Awesome. So one of our participants, his name is Rich, just typed in very well done and informative. Couldn't agree more. And looking at the clock, I'm going to have to leave it here for today. We're very well done. And thank you so much, Nate.
Thank you.
And we'll see everybody back next month. Next month, we're going to talk about lockout, tagout, live electrical permits. So if that affects your operation, come back on Thursday, July 11th, after your holiday shutdown, and learn about lockout, tagout. And I'll wish everybody a good, safe day.